Good afternoon. My name is Craig Weller, and I'm an employee of Pennsylvania Department of Education in the Bureau of Curriculum, Assessment, and Instruction. And part of my job at PDE is the science assessment. We work on the large-scale assessment, getting the PSSAs and the Keystone biology ready. And another part of what I do is the monitoring program for PSSAs and Keystone exams. And we have a team of about 25 people who go out at various times during the testing windows to make sure that the testing is completed with fidelity. And we have covered a lot of visits over the past 8 years, and I'll talk more about that as we go. So this is a PSSA Assessment Coordinator training, primarily directed at the district assessment coordinators and the school assessment coordinators for this year. If you have any questions, please enter your questions in the chat box, and what we'll do is hold off answering those until we're finished with both presentations. The first part of it is the part that I'm going to be delivering, just talking about policy issues with Pennsylvania Department of Education. The second part will be DRC driven with Kevin Trenholm, and once we're done with those two parts, we'll answer the questions. And of course, anything concerning school performance profile or SPP should be directed to that email address that is listed there, because that's just the way SPP wants it, because it's such a highly technical thing. We don't want different answers going out from different groups. So anything accountability wise SPP, it goes to RA-PA profile at pa.gov. Agenda, we have what's new for this year, a general overview of this program, PSSA, policy from PDE, what PSSAs are, planning for the assessment, participation in and administering the assessments, monitoring, and at the end we'll have contact information. This slide right here talks about what is new. You'll notice that there's nothing listed. So this is a placeholder, but that's good because we make changes year to year. The most recent ones I'm thinking of were the ones where the test was shortened a couple of years ago by 25%. That was pretty well met with applause by every facet of the testing community. So that's done. And we also combined math and science testing windows last year, which is met with mostly positive, but overall, I think it worked out pretty well since they only have 2 sections each for those 2 tests. And a reminder, if you ever have exceptions that you would like to get to your testing schedule, please just contact me at the email address that we'll share with you at the end of the presentation of my part. The policy of PSSA is that for federal accountability purposes for the United States Department of Education and ESSA, ESSA requires schools to test in grades 3 through 8. We know that. And also once in high school, as well as a science test in grades 4, 8, and 11. Now remember that wherever the student is at in their academic career, when they take Algebra 1, they would take the Algebra 1 Keystone exam at that time, as soon as they're completed with it. So it is possible that a student might have 7th grade Algebra 1, they test. So they could have potentially more than just one math test for that particular year. But once they take that, that's cached and held until their 11th grade year for accountability purposes. And then at that point, after 8th grade, if they've already taken their Algebra 1, they don't have any more math assessments in Pennsylvania. Make sure for bullet point 2, PIMS student data is always up to date because everything runs off of PIMS. And when it comes to pre-code labels, we've had horror stories in the past where people, maybe one district, 1,000 students didn't upload their PIMS data and they had to bubble it all in. So I don't know that that happens much anymore, but just be advised, PIMS, Pennsylvania Information Management System, must be updated. Students must be assessed at the enrolled grade at the time of testing. And that means that if a student is in 7th grade and they're in 7th grade the entire year, but they might be in accelerated math class or something like that, I do get calls saying, what should they test as? A 7th grader, an 8th grader, whatever. You always test the grade that they're in. But if a student is accelerated and they move on to a different grade within the school year, and as of the testing window, they're now in a new grade, that's what you would assess them with. So if they've moved up to 8th grade, you'll test them for 8th grade. PSSA and Keystone exams, students, as we said, will complete both of the assessments if in fact they take a Keystone trigger course for that. Now, it is possible that even though a student takes a trigger course, there are some districts that have like an algebra A and an algebra B, and so they would take it after B. That's just the way that it's set up. So it just depends on the individual district. And of course, every student succeeds at, or PSSA, Chapter 4, and accountability. Any questions like that, you can send to ra-pas@pa.gov. There are many resources, and DRC is going to tell you the old place to find them, and eDirect has a new name, but it's really the same thing, where you can find all of these non-secure items on the website. So the Handbook for Assessment Coordinator, HAC, what we have is we have a continually revised product. And we go through that every year painstakingly, trying to make sure that it satisfies everybody, including the legal department, because we don't want to leave things out that should be in there. So always make sure you read that, because it looks the same every year, but it's really not. Read aloud and scribing guidelines are available for you, directions for administration for each of the grade levels, DFA. In fact, one of the things that we want to do is we're moving from, you know how you have DFAs for grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What we're moving towards is having one DFA. And it's going to be all the grades together, but within it, you'll have little sections saying, if you're doing this grade, this might apply or something to that effect. So we're trying to go from like, what was it, 30, I remember 38 booklets down to 12 or something to that effect. Another thing is the Handbook for Secure Test Administration for both PSSAs and Keystone exams. Years ago, we had so much information lingering out there that we thought that we would put that in one spot. So I remember sitting down over months to develop that document. And the handbook is a standalone handbook, but it's also put at the end of the Handbook for Assessment Coordinators as well. So as assessment coordinators, you should be familiar with the Secure Test Administration Handbook. Scoring guidelines, of course, they're on there, and students are allowed to have scoring guidelines with them when they test. If you think about it, students are really only supposed to have their test booklet, their answer booklet, pencil, scratch paper, calculator if they need it for that particular section, and they can have the scoring guidelines. Accommodation guidelines, including L's for English learners. Notice how over time the L's has changed terminology, ELL, L. That would be something that you want to make sure to look through. And if you have any questions about that, I am going to mention that accommodations, we have Diane Samaska at PDE, who's the liaison between the Bureau of Special Education and our area that you might want to direct questions to. We will have her email address as well. Online testing, the next bullet point, 3 from the bottom there. Online testing is very important. Believe it or not, we have about 6.5% Commonwealth-wide testing online as of last year. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you're still talking 96,000 tests. So it's still a pretty significant amount. I'm going to put it out there. If you would be so kind as to try online today compared to how it was a couple of years ago, because we hear all the time, oh, we tried that when it first came out, or we tried that 3 or 4 years ago, or we tried, but the Insight test engine is so well developed and debunked at this point that no student has ever lost data on it. And you're given an extra benefit. You can test students. You know how you have the PSSA window starts on the 20th of April, and that ELA week is for 3 sections. The next week is math and science. And you're supposed to get all of your stuff in by May 1st for early reporting. If you test online, you can test out to the 8th and get it back, because all you do is press the button, submit. So you get a whole extra week to have the kids take it and still get early reporting. So if that's not a selling point, I don't know. But there's more to online than just that. There's also, think about the modified test that we used to have for PSSA that they did away with. We only had it for 2 years, but it was a generally very well received item for the students. They seemed to do very well with it. And when the Keystone came on, they got rid of the PSSA-M. But what they learned in the PSSA-M, they put forward in the online system. And so, for example, you'd have more white space for the kids to look at. You have 1 question per page. You have the ability to do all of those things, like with the online tutorial, the highlighter and underlining, scratching, like doing all, like almost your scratch paper on there. And you have the ability to mark items that you want to go back and check prior to submitting your test as a student. You also have the ability at the end, before you hit submit, or actually when you do, it reminds you, hey, you didn't answer question 3, 10, and 12, go back and do it. So it's a really nice thing for the students. And from the administration standpoint, you don't have to worry about losing any secure information. You just have a username and password to do. So for Keystone exams, and I know that's not what we're talking about today specifically, but for Keystone, we're up to about 11 to 12% online versus paper and pencil. And that gets pretty significant when you start adding up all of that, because we test about 2.4 million tests every year. And if you're talking about 11%, 6%, that's a lot. Oops, back it up. PDE calendars are posted 3 years in advance. And we take into account all of the different scenarios for the holidays that are up there. And this particular year is pretty sensitive because of Ramadan, I think. It's trying to make sure everything kind of worked out right. But we try to account for all the different holidays that are there, religious holidays or holidays, and we work around it. But yet everybody wants the testing as far back as possible in the calendar year. But the realistic thing is you can only push it back so far to get it scored and then back as quickly as possible. And we're talking, what, the 29th of May is when results come back for early reporting now. Online calculator manual and calculator policy. So all of these things are available to you for your reading pleasure. So if you ever can't get to sleep at night, pour through those books. Planning for the assessment, preparation, handbook for assessment coordinators. This is what's all in that, of course, scheduling, parent guardian notifications, things like letting them know that they have the test, preparing the classrooms, always looking at things like confidentiality agreement, parent information code of conduct, and calculators. All of those things which you might need, that you will need, are right in the HAC. And talking about the confidentiality agreement, that would be for parents coming in and wanting to see the assessment for opt-out for Chapter 4, which we'll talk about later. Participation, we have handbook for assessment coordinator, we have accommodations, we have L's, non-assessed students, people who withdraw, suspended, expelled, and home education. And I wanted to point out, if a student withdraws and you already have a booklet that has a barcode label on it, all you have to do is you can use the same booklet if no one has used it, and you can just put another barcode label on top of it, or you could just do not score it and send it back. If they moved out of state, for example, and you know they're not coming back. If a student is home schooled they would be eligible to test in your LEA. In fact, you have to let them test in your LEA. But if they are cyber charter schooled, you don't have to let them test in your LEA. You can if you get a request. But we found that there are a few reasons that are valid for districts to not want to do it, insurance being one of them for the student who's not insured because they're not a district student, and also the test security issue that might come up if the student would create an issue. Then it's like an added burden on you guys because it's not really your student. I mean, they would go there if they weren't homeschooled, but they don't go there, so it's up to you. Once again, these can all be, if you have any specific questions, you can talk with Diane Samaska about assessment accommodations for read alouds and small groups and despiraling, anything with concussions, broken arms, scribing issues, and unique accommodations. In fact, the last one there, unique accommodations, you really do have to communicate with Diane Samaska about it because I think she has to kind of review what you're talking about and giving a decision on whether that would really be allowed or not. The other ones like despiraling for small groups who need the test read aloud for science and math, not ELA, because that's assessing reading ability. Despiraling allows you to have groups of 5 or fewer with the same test form version number, and they would be in small groups. So online works really well for this because if you are designated as someone who needs it read aloud and you're online, you can have the headphones on, you have the special version of that is read aloud to the students. So it's a little more discreet for the students for their accommodations, and you don't have to have separate despiral read aloud sessions. So if nothing else, go online for your read alouds. Get a taste for what it's like with online, and I don't think you'll want to go back to paper and pencil. Concussion. What if a student has a concussion, but it happens the very first day of school? Well, if a letter is not received in at least 2 weeks prior to testing around that time by their doctor, it would not be allowed. Okay, if they had a letter in September or August even, that's too far in advance. We don't know if it's still a problem. So they have to have a letter. But if they have a letter, even though it's an existing condition from before, that's okay. A broken arm. Okay, hold your question until later. Oh, we're on page number 10, I believe. Yes. And so a broken arm would be an issue because if they normally write with their right, they would have to learn how to write with their left, or in unique situations, they can have a scribe where someone is sitting there listening to the answers and they're putting it in the book for them. So that's what's different between scribe and transcribe. You might already know that, but we have a lot of people listening. Unique accommodations, as I said, is something that would be specific to a very small percentage of students. Pennsylvania, alternate system of assessment, PASA, is first of all, eligibility is 6 specific criteria. And if the student matches those 6 criteria, they are eligible for the PASA. That is done in an entirely different process than the PSSA. And contact Lisa Hampy for that. And it is true, though, that if they qualify based on the 6 criteria, they would have to take all subjects with PASA. You can't mix and match. You can't go PSSA for some, PASA for others. You have to do all or nothing. Participation with accommodations for L's. Remember that the participation for ELA or Keystone exam for the people who are first-year students in U.S. schools would be optional. We do have students who take the assessments in their first year. It's not going to hurt you. It only counts for participation and not for performance anyway. They are allowed to use word-to-word translation dictionaries without definitions and without pictures for the 2 subject areas of math and science. And qualified interpreters and site translators for math and science are allowed, and except for writing prompts with the ELA PSSA section, in the writing section. And there are there are Spanish and English versions for math and science. All of these accommodations, just like all accommodations, are voluntary, they're not mandatory. So even if a student has an IEP or a 504, they don't necessarily have to do the accommodation if they are listed as eligible for it. Preparation. So I already mentioned 2 weeks prior to the start of testing window for concussions and participation in the assessment. Calculator usage for Pennsylvania, we have a policy where calculators can be used for math for grades 4 through 8, except for the first non-calculator item, first few. This year, I'm not sure, it might be 3 items, 4 or 5. As soon as they're done with that, they would be able to, the TA or the kids, like however you have it, just be consistent. If you have the kids put the sticky dots on the booklets, go ahead, or the TAs. Make sure that they're on there. One time during monitoring, I walked in and a student didn't have the sticky red sticker on it, and they were moving on to the calculator portion. So that would be a kind of an issue, right? And PSSA science, you can use a calculator there. Oh, and I did want to point out for grade 3, there are no calculator items for that. What about training for Handbook for Assessment Coordinators? It talks all about the training that's involved. As a district assessment coordinator, you're required to train your staff. You have school assessment coordinators in different buildings. So you're responsible for training in-house all of those school assessment coordinators, and talking about roles and responsibilities of the DAC and the SAC and the TAs and the proctors. And I did want to point out, test administrators are different than proctors. Sometimes they're used synonymously, but they're not the same thing. A TA would be the person that's in front of the class, like the regular classroom teacher reading the instructions to the students. They are in charge of the presentation of the assessment to the students. The proctor would be a second set of eyes that would be going around and actively monitoring in the classroom while testing is taking place. The chain of custody, we'll talk about that more later. I just wanted to kind of share where that came from. Carolyn Dumaresque, a few years back when she was the acting deputy or acting secretary of education for the Commonwealth, she had that as her motto, making sure we had chain of custody for all testing materials that are secure from the time they get in the district until the time they go ship back to DRC. Talk about common violations, potential consequence violations, and cautions. And by the way, talking about anything with violations, you got to use your best judgment as far as like report most things. You don't have to report all things. Do diligence in-house first, and we'll point out the things that you have to tell us about later. Okay, just like I had mentioned, the training by the district assessment coordinator has to be the PDE training, like this one you're at right now. This is technically for the spring. Therefore, you're here, so that's a qualifier. So if you also take getting ready in the fall, kind of the same thing. It's a little bit different, but we're talking about the training directly from PDE. So anything that's required for you as a district assessment coordinator, you have to complete, and all your PStats as well. PStats for DAC include the DAC PStat, the online training, the SAC, and the TA PStat. PStat stands for Pennsylvania State Test Administration Training. It was developed about 6 years ago. It has changed a little bit since then. It's a little bit easier to navigate, and it doesn't take all that long to complete the trainings. Make sure you have either certificates or the master list of all staff who have completed the PStats when we come for a monitoring visit. For the school assessment coordinator, you'll have to complete the P-stats for the SAC and the TAs, and attend the DAC training that's directly to you. And then all test administrators and proctors have to complete the test administrator training and go to the pstattraining.net website to get hooked up with that. Now, it is true that you have to be qualified and listed as the district assessment coordinator to grant access for some of these things. So if you look in there and you can't, you're going to have to call DRC and get access as the DAC. You're going to have to change your, sometimes that happens where a DAC or an SAC swap or there's a new DAC, you have to make sure that that's in place. Anything technical support with your PSTAT, you see the PSTAT at datarecognitioncorp.com is where you want to go, or call the number. And anything else for training would be general. If you have staff, which is maybe custodial staff or secretarial staff, anybody who's not considered a professional with a certificate personnel, but they're going to have something to do with the testing, they need to have training and sign a general test certification statement after they do their job, like even moving boxes around, anything like that. And speaking of which, the test security certification documents, of which we have four for the different types of classifications, are located in the Handbook for Assessment Coordinators and must be kept for a period of 3 years after testing. We mentioned the PDE training and the P-stats for DACs as training for them. Update the DRC Insight portal, accounts for your district and school. And that would be, oh, and another thing is, I was going to mention, not only online might be good for you and you don't know it yet, but the easy way to check to see if your school district and school can handle the load from technology is to try the CDTs and hook them up for the classroom diagnostic tools as much as you can. So get all the students on the school at the same time and check out your bandwidth, check out your technology. And if that works, it should work the same for online testing. Make sure as the DAC, you're reviewing all of your manuals, also the procedures for homeschooled students and for handling cyber charter school students. And just as maybe you don't know, but you probably do, cyber charter schools have their students testing all around the Commonwealth. They might have 10,000 students in their school, and they have to divvy them up at different locations. And a lot of times they're at hotels, and they test at hotels. In secure environments, they would kind of be, all the grades kind of lumped together, of course, because they can't have parents bringing them over a month-long period of time. So it's a compressed time, but it's secure. Roles and responsibility more for the DAC. So you have to train school assessment coordinators. And at the top here, we see sign-in sheet with agenda. It's not a mandatory thing, but it kind of is now because we want to have proof that you're doing it. When we go out for monitoring, if we ask you, have you trained your staff? And as the DAC, you'll say yes. Or the SAC, you'll say yes. But then when we go and ask the TAs, when we interview the test administrators separately, they might say, no, I never did get training. They just told me to go on the computer and complete the P-stat. Well, then therefore, that's not right. So if you have a sign-in sheet and an agenda that specifically has that, that's proof to you. And I, as a DAC, would not want to not have that or those items. As soon as you get the materials from DRC, make sure you inventory them. It seems like that's one thing that's kind of being overlooked now. You get 14 boxes from DRC and you kind of just shove them in a locker somewhere. But you really need to open them up to find out if what's supposed to be there is there. Sometimes you have maybe you're expecting 10 boxes and you only receive 9. Okay, now that's pretty easy, but then like what's in the box? Do you really have the number of tests that you were supposed to get? And if not, that's something of paramount importance because we can't have secure test materials just floating around out there. They are secure and they are owned by Pennsylvania Department of Education. You want to also distribute your test to the school assessment coordinators if you're a ship to district school or district. Ship to district would occur for any district that doesn't have at least 9 schools. If you have 9, you're automatically a ship to school district. You can pay a nominal fee. And I know a lot of districts are tight with their money right now, but I think it's $500. Is that per school or is that one for the whole district? So that's one time. So if you pay $500 and you have 6 schools, they would go directly to the schools then.
And all assessments.
And for all assessments. And that seems like a bargain to me. Can you imagine what you don't have to do as a DAC then? I'm not saying to be lazy, but I'm thinking every layer that you can cut out is probably going to save the potential for losing stuff. Also, you're going to collect an inventory package and return to DRC if you are a ship to district, and you sign the test security certification post-testing and keep it for a period of 3 years. Down at the bottom, it does say if you suspect anything that is a test security violation, you have to report it to PD as soon as they occur. And I did want to mention that if you have a cell phone issue, we used to be very clear that they must report cell phone issues right away to PDE, but we don't have that guidance any longer. About 2 years ago, just to refresh your memory, we said we were getting about 1,000 contacts per year with cell phones. So our policy now is after you do an internal investigation and it's deemed that there was no breach of test security due to that cell phone being present, you don't have to report it to PDE. You're still going to have to make note of it and keep it in-house just in case something comes up and you need a record of that. But even though it's not reported, you still have to consider some kind of action towards the student for having it because you told them not to have it. But it's up to the district as to what they want to do. If you do find something on the phone after an investigation, you're going to contact us. That would be a lot more, there's a lot more potential for activity at that point if something was copied and sent. Next, for school assessment coordinators, and as you know, when we go out to schools, we usually talk with the district assessment coordinator, the school assessment coordinator, the building principal, and 2 test administrators. So that was at a minimum. But I just wanted to point out, we've revised the monitoring program. We're trying to pare down the time it takes in order to get a monitoring visit done. Right now we're probably averaging about, I have surveys that I sent out to you guys and I'm still reviewing them, but I'm trying to guesstimate maybe like 3 hours on site. So what we're trying to do is get all of the stuff we need to get done within 2 hours or less. So we're in and we're out. So that's what we're trying to do for you. So not to burden you because you have other responsibilities during the time when we're there. So we're eliminating the building principal questions on the monitoring document. That means when we go out, that usually takes, I'm going to say, at least 15 to 20 minutes. So that will eliminate that much. If you are a building principal who's also the district assessment coordinator or school assessment coordinator, we'll still speak to you, but in that capacity, not specifically over the title of building principal. A lot of times BPs or building principals, they don't have much to do with testing and they push it off maybe on school counselors. I just say that because I'm certified as a school counselor, so I know what that's like. Also, on the back of the booklets, as of last year, do you remember we had something new last year was the bubble to put down the TA initials on the back. Some school assessment coordinators missed that last year. It wasn't like, okay, if you miss it, you get some kind of bad mark from PDE, but it was the first year. So now that we have that, and it's a continual thing, we want to make sure on each back cover you put down the initials of the primary test administrator. But if the student moves to an extended time location or something like that, you probably want to bubble the multiple people bubble on that form. We don't have more than one that you can put down the initials, but you could bubble the other. You want to attend mandatory meetings or trainings for SAC, complete the SAC and TAP stats, review all DFAs and Handbook for Assessment Coordinator and Handbook for Test Security Administration or Secure Test Administration, and update the Insight portal, and train your test administrators and proctors. Remember that the turnover in schools these days, I think, I could just generalize this. I think it's there's a pretty good turnover. And there's a turnover not only just with teachers, but also DACs and SACs. So every year, it just feels like 25% of the people are new. And so we've been training for years, but there's a lot of newness out there. On the other end of the spectrum, you have a lot of people who've been doing this for a very long time and they get complacent. So you want to make sure, focus in on your new people and the seasoned people. The people in the middle are usually pretty square on. More SAC, create the testing schedule, make sure you have small group settings, extended time locations. Make sure that you're prepared for parental requests to review the test. This must be done with a paper booklet. I've already received a couple requests today via email that was saying that we have a parent of a cyber charter school student and they don't want to come in to review the test. Well, the only thing you can do then is to put down parent refusal because they're not abiding by the Chapter 4 for a religious opt-out. But 2 weeks before testing starts, that's when the paper and pencil version will be out to you that you can use to sit down with a parent and they can look through it. Make sure that they look at all 3 content areas if they want to opt their student out of all 3 content areas. They can't just look at math and opt out on all 3. And for online testing, once again, remember, online's the way to go. You want to do online. DRC Insight portal. Make sure no prohibited materials are on the classroom walls or on the walls in the hallways if a student has to go to the bathroom. We have seen walls that have maybe science projects on the walls in elementary schools, and a student has to be escorted down to the bathroom, and there they are. So make sure they're covered up or taken down. Especially being that I have a science background, I go in some science classrooms that are used, and they have periodic tables of the elements up. They might have globes or world maps or stuff like that that might be used for the science assessment. So cover or remove. The SAC receives the test directly from the DAC if a shipped to district, or DRC if a shipped to school. Once again, if you are shipped to school, you want to make sure as the SAC, you immediately inventory those booklets and order additional ones if necessary. DRC includes 10% overages, and that usually covers what you need. But say you have 30 kids that just enrolled. You're going to need more. DRC is really good about it. They'll overnight them to you, and you'll get them ASAP. You also want to make sure you put your labels on your test booklets, but don't look at the test. Only put the labels on the outside, don't look. The only people that see the test are DRC, PDE assessment personnel, and the students. When you actively monitor as TAs, you're walking around and you can see where the student is at in the test booklet because it clearly says at the top, Section 1, Science. You know that. You don't have to look at the item so much, and make sure they're in the right answer booklet location. That's called active monitoring. But every year we get things back. Well, this student put their answers in Section 2, but they were taking Section 1. And you know why that is? There was not active monitoring going on. The teacher might have been sitting there grading papers. They might have been surfing the web. Totally, you can't do that, but sometimes you see that. Distribute tests to test administrators on the day and time. Remember, we want consistency. So you could have your test administrators come to you as the SAC and get them at your office. Make sure they sign out by signing out and counting out. Counting has reduced the amount of lost materials for us greatly over the past 5-6 years that we recommended that. You want to monitor test sessions. Now, having said that, I asked school assessment coordinators and district assessment coordinators a lot. I say, do you go into the testing classrooms? They go, well, I don't really want to go in there because I'm going to disrupt the testing environment. But here's the thing. If you don't go into the room, you can't see a lot of stuff. Like, for example, I was just into a room in January for wave 2 of Keystones, and from the hallway, everything looked great. But when I walked in, I noticed that students were sitting next to each other. They had the same test form version numbers. I looked up front. It was a biology assessment, and there was biology diagrams with labels partially covered up, but not totally. And then I looked over on the right-hand side where I couldn't see from the hallway, full pictures of body parts and stuff, clearly visible to the students. So you can't always see from the hallway. You got to get in there and walk around a little bit. After you go in and you're discreet, it's not a big deal. You get skilled at it and nobody cares. Make sure that you collect the test administrator or collect the test from the test administrators by going back and repeating the way you had them handed out by signing and counting. Make sure you store all materials in a locked area, limited to only, and I'm going to say this, we're trying to get to about 2 or 3 people. Some districts have their custodial staff having keys, and they're large districts and they have 15 people that have access. There's no need for that. Even if you have a storage room, you still need to have some kind of locked containment vessel inside the storage room. So the custodians might have access, but they won't have access to that cabinet or whatever you need to store all those tests. Or you could just go online. You don't have any tests. Return to all tests to DAC or DRC and sign your certification statement. Here's something that comes up every year. What about test administrators and proctors? Can they be substitutes? Absolutely. If you have regular substitutes at your district and they're trained and they will sign the test security certification, they can be substitutes. What about substitute services? Yes. Anybody who gets a paycheck from the district, even if it's a remote kind of paycheck, they can perform their duties as a test administrator. However, no volunteers are allowed. No retired people are allowed. They might have administered tests for 15 years, but they're now retired. They're not district employees. Student teachers can be in the room, but they cannot have anything to do with testing. That was a little bit different. Years ago, we said no student teachers in the room. Then we got pushed back. Now we allow them there because they have to see what to do when they become active classroom teachers themselves. And SACs have to report any suspected test violations immediately to the DAC, unless they believe the DAC is responsible for the test security violation. Then the SAC should probably go to the building principal or assistant superintendent, and report to PDE. Okay, well, that takes care of the DAC part and the SAC part. Now we have the TA part. What do these individuals have? They have to attend training led by the school assessment coordinator, of course, in-house. Some districts have really, really big buildings, like maybe 50 classrooms that have testing going on. Other ones might have 1. Where this one district might have a DAC, is the SAC, is the TA. I mean, we have that in Pennsylvania. But more often than not, it's somewhere in between. So complete the PSTAT for TAs, and also review the directions for administration, online user guides, and handbook for secure test administration. And make sure students understand the code of conduct for test takers. We want that to be done a day ahead of time, so it's not done during the day of testing. Because the directions for administration can be lengthy. We're trying to cut back on the amount of verbiage in the directions for administration that we have to read prior to the students starting their test. And that's happening now. So maybe next year, it might be shorter and getting to the point, because it is pretty lengthy. But we have to make sure things are in there for legal purposes as well. Create a seating chart. So your TAs are responsible for creating a seating chart that they will use to seat the students for testing purposes. If you have, and this is not a mandatory thing, this is a recommended thing, seating charts for online will be easy for you because online already has their form given to them prior to testing. So you know student A has form 1, student B has form 2 or whatever. Whereas a seating chart with paper and pencil, it's a little bit harder to find, you know, you wouldn't have their form number on their seating chart, just where they're sitting. Because there are a lot more forms for paper and pencil than there are for online. Ensure students are familiar with the testing procedures and answer any questions they may have. Actively monitor by going up and down the rows. Maintaining a calm and quiet environment during testing. And make sure, we mentioned before about what can be on the walls and what can't. So if you have the clock, like right over there is a clock and right where we're at, that doesn't have to be covered. It's a clock. If you have quotes, some of the quotes are made by famous people that actually have the name of the famous person underneath. Maybe the student is doing an ELA assessment and it has something to do with that quote. So we like those quotes or anything that could be tangible that might assist them to be covered up. But if they're just little motivational things like the cat poster, like hang in there, that's okay. We don't care about that. In elementary for PSSA, you know the rooms are very well stocked all over the place. It's hard to cover everything up. For high school, it's a little bit easier. Just use common sense. And as soon as the materials are, or as soon as the tests are done, collect the test materials as soon as the student indicates he or she is finished. This is very important because a few years ago, we used to have, when the student's book is closed on their desk, they could leave it on their desk, but we no longer have that. As soon as the kid shuts the book, they're supposed to raise their hand and the TA will collect that up to the desk and they cannot get it back. Evidently, there were students that were going back into their booklets during testing and we don't want to see that. And collect and return test booklets to the SAC when testing is complete and sign your test security certification. After they're done with that, they're pretty much done. What about all these things? So PA Secure ID list distribution or distribution list, that is a really important item that we have where we link test administrators up with the students that they're administering to by PA Secure ID. We know that you out in the schools, you use names because it's easier for you to use. All we ask is that when we come into monitor, you give us a version that purges that column that would have names on it. That's very easy to do on an Excel spreadsheet. Because we can't see student results and student names if we do an investigation. On your PA Secure ID list distribution, the list must include for each student the administrator's name, school year, subject being administered, and if you have any extended time or makeups, they need to be included on there as well. Did you hear that? Extended time and makeups, because we want to make sure that the original TA is not held accountable for something that happened during extended time. So we want that listed. So it's just adding 2 columns to your spreadsheet. and retain that for a period of 3 years. Now this one here, I'm just going to read it to you. This is talking about test security. The assessments rely on the measurement of individual achievement. Any deviation from assessment procedures is strictly prohibited and will be considered a violation of test security. School personnel who are involved in the assessment program must maintain the security of all assessment materials at all times, and TAs should not have assessment materials in their possession at any time other than during the actual assessment administration. So think about it. If you hand out tests to your TAs an hour ahead of time, that's bad. 15 minutes, that's probably better. Try to limit it down to no more than 15 minutes prior to testing. There was a school somewhere, I remember, that had them for over an hour. And you're allowed to, if you drop them off at each of the TA's doors at their classroom, you can have other people designated as the SAC. So if you have a lot of classrooms, you can maybe have 3 people handing the materials out. It doesn't have to be that actual person who is the SAC. As long as they're trained, that's fine. Certifications, we know they have to be maintained for 3 years, and do not return these to PDE or DRC. And there are those 4 different types. What about if someone does not sign a test security certification? We need a written explanation at PDE, because this is kind of like the legal contract that PDE expects TAs to sign. And every year, we get about 1 or 2, believe it or not, that don't sign. There might be some kind of valid reason, although I can't really think of what that would be, because you're basically saying if you don't sign it, well, I didn't do all the things that I should do. But we have to be told about it in a written format and a description of some of the action or the action taken by the chief school administrator in response to failure to sign the statement. Chain of custody, well, you can look at that. That's talking about just making sure everything is known to be where it is at all times. Making sure the lock storage area is appropriate. Never give out samples of books to the test administrators as part of training. I know in years past, that was actually part of the training, because I used to give them, and we used to get a book years ago. Don't know if that was even valid then, but we did. And remember, counting is recommended. Most do that now. Here's some examples of testing violations talking about a misuse of accommodations. Like they'll give everybody accommodations. Well, they should be in an IEP or a 504. Now, we're not talking about standard one with extra time. It should be every student has the ability for accommodations if they use those accommodations in everyday school environment, including testing. But if a student never takes a test by themselves during the year and they want to take it by themselves for the PSSA, that's not right. That's not the proper accommodation for that student. You don't want to under-proctor by just not watching what they're doing. You don't want to over-proctor by making sure that you go by and point out things to them or encouraging answers to be changed, and viewing secure test materials by the TA. You don't want to ever discuss test questions with students, even after the test. In some cases, students will come up and they're befuddled by a question and they want to ask their science teacher or their math teacher, hey, what about this, and you can't talk about it. Now, having said that, from your perspective, if you want to get involved in the testing program with the Commonwealth, it's very easy to do so. You can belong to committees that attend in the summer, usually in Harrisburg, sometimes in State College, sometimes in Lancaster, we've been there. And what they do is they allow new items to be reviewed for PSSA and Keystone in all content areas. They allow range finding to be done, which is scoring of open-ended and constructed response items. And they have data review for field test items. After items are tested, they come back with the statistics on them. And it's determined at those meetings which ones should be used as operational items and which ones should just be gone. And so basically there are 6 different meetings that occur over the summertime. And if you want your staff to get involved, all you have to do is go on the PDE website under Assessment and Accountability. And once you hit PSSA or Keystone Exams, down the right-hand side under Other Materials, there's an application for committee meetings. Once you fill out a committee meeting application and get a letter from the superintendent indicating that you can go to those meetings, they are put on a list, if approved by the PDE content specialist, and then they may be asked to come to a meeting. And based upon how they do, they might be asked to come back. So you have to have a minimum of 5 years of teaching in that particular content area in order to be on committee. And what we hear every year is the teachers come in maybe for the first time and they go, I had no idea the depth that everything is done in the assessment program to get these assessments ready to roll every year. It takes about 3 years minimum from when an item gets written to where it gets massaged. You know, they actually get a chance to change the item in committee. Then it goes to field test. And when it comes back, they can go, yeah, it didn't perform too well. The p-values don't work out. It's outside the range. We're going to get rid of it or keep it. So they make the decision. And then they're also training the trainers to score the open-ended items. So PA educators have everything to do with the PA assessments. And you too can get involved. Okay, cell phones, we already talked about that. No picture taking devices and copying or recording any part of the secure test materials. And that leads me to remember, you can copy any non-secure things, like a handbook for assessment coordinators. You're allowed to copy things out of there. You could just go online and just print it right from there. I think standing by a photocopier with a book that looks like a test is kind of a red flag. If somebody sees you doing it in your district, I wouldn't want to do it. And now here's what can happen. If you are involved in a test security issue or one of your staff is, you could get a verbal reprimand, a written reprimand. You could be suspended with or without pay. You could be terminated from your job and career. You could have your certification taken away, so you can't even do that anymore, even after a period of time. And criminal charges could be filed and pursued by the Commonwealth, and that would be bad. So don't do anything. It's not worth it. And the do not score label. We did talk about that a little bit. Do not score. So if a student gets sick on a book, you can put a do not score label after you transcribe all of the items. I know everybody looks forward to that. It just depends on how much they did. Like if they just started the test and they only had maybe a couple items done, I wouldn't even worry about transcribing that. Do not score and take care of that. And have them just retest with a different form. But on the other hand, maybe they're one question away from finishing it. Then what do you do? Because the student already gave it their best shot. That's going to have to be up to you. And make sure that the students take everything seriously. And I think they should. Although sometimes we do hear people who are TAs and they're kind of, they're not so serious themselves, and it kind of has a tendency to rub off down to the students as well. So try to make sure your staff is serious about it. And I also say, the certificates of completion for PSTAT, post them outside the testing room so when the students walk in, at least they see, oh, my teacher had to take a test in order to give this test. Maybe it doesn't do anything, but why just put it in a binder that no one's ever going to see? Might as well use it. And reminders, proctor, but don't over proctor. Encourage classrooms to check their answers. You're allowed to do that individually too. Like you used to have to make a total comment class-wide, but now if you see a student and they're out of section or something, you can go over to them as long as you don't touch the booklet and say, you're out of section, you need to get to the proper section. And make sure that the forms next to each other, that the students are next, like say on a 1 next to a 1 or a 2 next to a 2, or within early or easy view of another person. Read the code of conduct, as we said, make sure that they fill in the bubble for code of conduct, and review student test, do not review student test items and any answers for the students. Do not assist, influence, provide feedback. And the last one there, don't let them do any tested subjects after they finish. So if they're finishing the science test, don't have them doing any science related stuff, and they can clearly not write anything down. They cannot write even a crossword puzzle or crayons or anything like that. They can only read, and if they're taking the ELA assessment, maybe they have homework in science. They're allowed to read through the science book, but they just can't write anything down. And then here is the monitoring program. I wanted to be clear about what we do. We come out and it's unannounced. We hit about 150 visits per year statewide. We make sure that we hit cyber charters, charter schools, regular districts, even anybody basically that has the assessments. Anybody has our property, we have the right to go in and review. So even some private schools, they test using our assessments. When we go there, we make sure that we observe as much as possible. And there's going to be more of a push on observation and less on a push on interview questions. With our seasoned staff now, we can go in and we can pretty much make an assessment with the binder that you have and observations that we make, that we might not even really have to sit down with you to go over the interview questions. And that would be a really good help to you guys. So we hear you and we're trying to make it better for you. We did about 1,600 visits over the past 8 years. And every one of those had a letter that went out to the chief school officer. And I think the feedback that we got back from the field has been overwhelmingly positive. We used to have something like 60% of the letters that went out requesting that they send an LEA written response plan back in because they did not meet expectations. And today we're down to about 14%. And that's consistent from year to year. So that's about what it is right now. So about 85% of the schools are doing things right and 15% not. But we're tasked to do this by the United States Department of Education, and we will continue to do so. And as I said, make it a better experience for you. Data forensics, on the other hand, that's more of a red flag issue. If something comes up and there's this internal investigation, maybe they see a lot of erasures, they might send a team out that might take multiple days at the school in question. That's not really the regular monitoring. So if you have a data forensics there, it's going to be a little longer. Student erasures, taken into account how long it takes the students to answer the questions when they're on the computer, how often they change the answers, and any statistical analyses from the student scores and performance. Now, what about documentation? When we go out for monitoring, here's really all you need to have. You need to have training agendas and sign-in sheets, test schedules, including your small group rosters, any makeup schedules. You might not have it if we get there early enough, like in ELA, you won't have them ready yet. But if you do in science, that would be great when you get to the science portion. PA secure ID list distributions, fine, you got to have that. Sign out, sign in sheets, test security certifications from the prior year. That's what we were going to ask for. So they have to be readily accessible. Don't have them over at the district office. Kind of have it maybe even on a server. You could look it up. Procedures for parents to opt out. Remember, they need to come in and do it by the rules in order to have the actual opt out. And we want to see the request letters. And you know, new last year was the career interest inventory for students. We do review that as part of our monitoring program. At PD, they were trying to find a place to put that, and that's where they put it. So it doesn't exactly mesh with monitoring, but it kind of does, and we're getting better at it because all we have to do is select 6 different PA secure IDs, ask for the portfolios, or if you have an online system like Smart Futures or Naviance, we just get on there and check out those students, make sure that they have enough items in there. And if they're, say they're in high school and they're only maybe halfway through their 11th grade year, they're not going to have 8 items. They might have 4 items. We understand that. So you're not going to get knocked for that. But if you have 0 items, that would be a problem. And remember, it's done by grade span. So the career interest inventory for students is done by the grade span. And we're at the end of the first part, but I wanted to point out to report suspected violations, contact PDE at that email address. Use the subject line for details about the incident. So if it's like a cell phone issue, just put cell phone there. J-Gift is the guy in charge of the test security. Charlie Wayne's a backup. They're both part of the data forensics team. Accommodation questions, send to Diane Samaska. And I am, any questions relating to monitoring, general questions, and science assessment. And for more information on PD administrations for PSSA, and if you want that committee membership application, go to the PD website and you will be amazed. Our website's a lot better than it used to be. And that might I say. Okay, that takes care of the first part. Now we have Kevin Trenholm from DRC coming up. What's wrong?
I'll need it on.
Oh yeah, I'm just gonna get over here so we weren't scruffing around.
Thanks, Craig. Craig said, my name is Kevin. I'm from Data Recognition Corporation, and I'm going to talk about the basic logistics and some of the things we see over and over that we can hopefully talk about now so they don't happen during the actual assessment. Sorry. Okay, so my agenda is going to cover some general information. I'm going to talk about paper and pencil administration, talk about online administration, and then about accountability and attributions. Again, I'm talking more about the DRC side of this. Anytime you have anything about policy, it would always go to PDE. So everything we do at DRC is done through the Insight or the DRC direct. We've added a lot more functionality to it, so it's kind of more of a one-stop shop for everything. It's, again, controlled by a single user ID. It's the same one you've used over the years. We don't change it between administrations. What we do every time we have an administration, we give you new permissions. And we grant them just the District Assessment Coordinator on file. And it's up to the DAC to push these out to other users. And you could send out just one part of it to a person, maybe you want one person to do the enrollments, and that's all you give that person. Or maybe you want somebody to back you up in everything, you can give that person all your permissions. So it's all up to you as a DAC to decide who's going to do what in your districts. And of course, inside the system, enrollments, ordering of materials, correction systems, attribution systems, our reports are in there. Like I said, it's a one-stop shop for everything that we do at DRC. Some of the stuff you'll be using for the PSSA include the materials receipt notice. When you get your materials, we would like you to go into the system and confirm that you received them. This lets us know that there's nothing out there that's outstanding. It's kind of a spot for us to go in there and see if you received your materials or not. Just know that once you've entered the date, you can't change it. Additional materials, we do ask that you inventory them as soon as you get them. As Craig was talking about earlier, it's important to see what you have, make sure you're not missing anything. And if you have any new students, to make sure you have enough materials. We do send 10% overage, but you may need some more Spanish materials perhaps. If you do, you have to use the additional materials system in the DRC Insight portal. And for PSSA, it opens up on April 6th. Also in the system is a materials accountability form. This is where you will indicate to us if materials are missing for some reason. And we do recommend that you start using it right away. Perhaps during the ELA assessment, you have a student become ill on a booklet and it's too destroyed to send back to anybody else, so you destroy it securely. So it's too soiled to send back. By policy, you destroy it locally, and then go into the materials accountability form and enter in the little text window the security barcode number of the booklet that you had destroyed. What that does is during cleanup, if you're missing a booklet, we go to this form first. And it tells us why it's missing. We don't contact you. PD doesn't contact you. This is the communication between us. And also, you'll see in the system a bunch of pages that are very useful. The first one is the announcements page. Every time there is a change to a deliverable or to a date to any of our systems, it's updated. Now, we can't push out emails saying when it's been updated. So it really helps you if you go in there every week, every other week, and just check to make sure dates haven't changed. For example, all the information about the spring Keystone exams is right there for you. Also, the user guides, the electronic copies of the DFAs, anything about the technology updates, all this is found underneath the documents page. And then for the online software for our Windows and our Mac desktops, as well as other secure browsers and the central office services, everything's in there for downloads to get most of the software you need for online testing. And also available are online tutorials. I'll mention them a little bit later, but these are available for you in the system here and also available publicly. So somebody will just go to the DRC Insight portal and just go in there and just start clicking around, be able to find these. And what these are videos of what the test engine looks like and how it's used. So if you have parents asking you about online testing and you want to tell them some more about it, good thing to do is just direct them to the test tutorials. Quick plug for the Psas system. It's designed and maintained by PD and DRC. Just everybody who takes any test administrator who administers an assessment has to take the Psas. If they took it for the winter Keystones, they're done. They have to take it once per school calendar year. And if you ever find anything that you think could be done better or different or wrong, typos or anything in the system, that pstat@datarecognitioncorp.com email address, you send it to that, it actually comes straight to me, and we can work on the system, make sure it's better for you as the end user. So I'm going to talk about some accommodated materials that are available out there. We have both accommodations for the online and the paper tests. For the paper booklets, we have the Braille and large print editions. And it's the first time I'm going to say this, and you're going to hear it 2 more times after this, but when using Braille and large print editions, make sure the information gets transcribed into a scannable answer booklet. Every year, we find people call us and say, why doesn't my student have a score? First thing we ask is, do you use large print? I'd say 50% of the time the answer is yes. And then we find out not enough information was transcribed into a scannable answer booklet, students not getting a score. It just amazes us. We train this every single year for the last 10 years, and it continues to happen. We have Spanish translated versions for math and science, algebra, biology. And if doing testing online, we have the audio version available for online testing. And this is a good option for those of you who have students who need the entire assessment read aloud. It's a really good place so you don't have to make small groups and despiral booklets and all that extra work you have to do with the read aloud. It's a lot easier to give them the online audio version. And just let you know that about 90% of the districts last year actually used the audio version. So it's if you're not using it, you probably should think about using it because it's really being used by a lot of the students now. We also have video sign language versions for the math and the science exams. When using any online accommodation, make sure that it's in the student record, that accommodation is in there before doing your test sessions. The longer you wait to add that accommodation to the student record, the more difficulties you'll have later on in the testing process, the online testing process. I'll get to that a little bit later. Some more general information. Question we get a lot is about makeups. When can they occur? And they can occur at any time. The most common one is ELA. The students start there on day 1, and maybe you're skipping day 2 and test it again on day 3. You can have that makeup done on day 2. You don't have to wait to a makeup window. Makeups can occur at any time for the subject's window. The longer you wait, the more likely you're going to return a booklet that's not complete, and the student's not going to get a score. Again, when transcribing those large print and braille, make sure that all sections have been completed. A lot of times we'll get section 1 and section 3 done, but not section 2 for ELA. And the attempt logic for all the assessments are at least 5 items in each section. So if they miss a section during the transcription, the student is not going to get a score. Make sure booklets coming back to DRC have a pre-code label or a district school label applied if you want the booklet processed. I'd say the other 28–30% of the time people call and say, why does my student not have a score? It's because they forgot to put a label on the booklet. And as Craig referenced earlier, there is early reporting available. If you return your booklets, anything that's in your schools out by May 1st, they're going to be in a data file available to you on May 29th. You don't have to have all the students in there. Whatever you have done, get those answer booklets back to us on May 1st, and we'll give you early results for those students. And as another plug for online testing, because we don't have to ship those booklets back to us, we don't have to cut them up, we don't have to scan them, we don't have to image them. If you do online testing, you have until June 8th in order to get the, May 8th in order to get the online tests done. And real quick, here's some important dates. To arrive by April 6th. If they don't arrive by April 6th, give us a call at our customer service line to find out what's going on with them. And then return dates, ELA, April 29th. Math and science, May 1st. Talk about that. Whatever you have, get it out. Get it back to us. Get those answer booklets back to us, and we'll get you some early reporting. It's really important that on May 1st and May 15th, by May 15th, that everything's out of your schools. If you return stuff after that, we can't guarantee they're going to get shipped to us and through our scanning system, our processing system, in time for any of the reporting. So that you may be missing out on summary reports, ISRs, data interaction, and all the state and federal accountability reporting. So it's important. May 15th, everything must be out of schools. Now about some paper and pencil administration. I'm going to talk about a few things, but the biggest thing again is, why do we see students not getting scores? It's transcription issues, misuse of barcode labels, and of course not using the correct system or attribution systems correctly. Basically what these first bullets are saying is, if you have a booklet coming back to DRC and you want it processed as scored, it has to have a pre-code label on it or a district school label on it. The only booklets, answer booklets that should come back without a label are those that are completely blank. If it has writing in it, we need to know what to do with it. Do we process it? Do we not process it? And this is important because if you return a booklet without a label, it's not going to get scored. We do catch some of them. I know in the past some of you have been lucky. We've caught some of them, but more often than not, we don't, and the student does not get a score. And then you don't notice it until the attribution system, when you try to match the PIMS record to the student's record, and you can't find the student's record, and then we find out that a label was not placed on the booklet. And by that time, it's too late. So pre-code labels, these are delivered to you, substituted by subject, grade, and school. And this is based off of, for PSSA, the file we receive from PIMS. So these are all the PIMS students we received in the pre-code file. When using labels, you can use different subjects in different booklets. Labels are specific to a student. Every label is a unique barcode. So if you happen to lose the mathematics label for a student, you could use a science label for that student also. And because they're unique barcode labels, please do not make copies of labels. Does that make sense? The labels are not subject specific. The labels are student specific. So if you need more labels, please do not make copies of labels, because this becomes a duplicate in our systems, and it shuts down our systems during scanning. You need more labels, contact us. It's so important to us that if need be, we'll overnight them to you. If you have a student who's no longer enrolled, and you have a pre-code label for that student, just discard that label. Again, we get a PIMS file a few months prior to testing with every student. We give you labels for every student. The labels are to help you with ease of assessment, and it's not for anything other than that. It's not for accountability. It's for helping you not have to bubble hundreds of booklets. So if the student has moved or withdrawn, please just discard that label. And when you get your pre-code labels, please verify that the first name, last name, PSSA ID, and date of birth are accurate. Those are the 4 matching criteria we use between booklets and PIMS data. If it is wrong, discard the label and use a district school label and bubble it exactly as it appears in PIMS. So if it's wrong, please don't use it. Now, the district school labels include just specific information about the site. It lets us know that this booklet came from this school and this district. Therefore, it's important to bubble all the information, again, exactly as it appears in PIMS, the first name, date of birth, and PSSA ID. When using a district school label, make sure on page 2 you fill out the demographic information. And whether you use a pre-code label or a district school label, accommodations on page 3 needs to be entered. We do not get that from any place other than the booklet. Do not score labels should be used if a booklet should not be scored, obviously. And reasons for that may be the student it becomes tore up a little, maybe tore it up, so it's impossible for the student to continue. Do not score labels so we can account for it when it comes back to the schools. Or perhaps the student started it and withdrew. Again, you don't need to have a booklet returned for a student who withdrew. Do not score label on the booklet. And when you do put do not score labels on the booklets, make sure you cover the current label that's on the booklet. A lot of schools like to put their district school labels in all their booklets and then use them as needed. And then they forget to put do not score labels on these booklets, which makes us have a lot of blank documents in the system because phantom student records for you out there, which we don't want. So it's very important that you take a do not score label and place it on top of the other label. Our processing systems are designed to look in that corner, and whatever label is in that corner tells us what to do with that booklet. When we return to secure materials, another plug at transcribing, and make sure that you transcribe for large print and braille, as well as any other accommodations that may have been used. Sometimes students use a word processor, they're open-ended items, and that gets transcribed into the booklet. So as you are getting stuff back from your TAs, make sure that this is done, all transcription is done. Make sure every used answer booklet has a label attached to it, the correct label, and you can do that as they return them to you. And then make sure there are no answer booklets tucked inside test booklets. It's very common for test administrators and school coordinators to keep everything together by tucking booklets, which is fine, but just make sure that when you return the DRC that you pull the answer booklet out. I see the last 25% of students not getting scores is because they tuck the answer booklet into the test booklet. And when they ship it to us, they rattle, shake around a little bit, and they get so tight in there, we can't tell when we scan them. So make sure there are no tucked answer booklets inside test booklets. We want to make sure every student gets credit for all the work they've done. And again, complete the materials accountability form. So if you have any missing materials, we can have that first communication. The process for returning booklets has not changed. This slide is the same slide we've been using for about 10 years now. Make sure all answer booklets go into a plastic bag. We don't want anything to spill on them on the way in the transportation back to us. Secure that bag down and put it in the box. And if you have any extra space on top of that box, throw in some crumpled up newspaper. We don't care what you throw, just crumple it up, because boxes that are not filled to the top can crush during transport. And if they crush and the side bursts open, stuff falls out. So kind of build them up to the top so they're sturdy. All boxes have labels, have tabs labeled, have flaps labeled A, B, and C. Make sure when you return the DRC, you fold in the A and B flaps, because those are the flaps that have labels on them that came out to you. Fold those down, cover them up so the C flap's exposed. And then make sure you seal the box up tightly with about 3 strips of tape. And in the box, the C box now goes into our DRC, UPS, RS labels. So one single label that does dual tracking purposes. And check the bottom of the box. We sent the materials out to you. Make sure that the bottom of the box is secure, ship them back to us. And kind of make sure the tape goes up the sides. We see a lot of times that it splits. And again, when boxes start splitting open, materials get lost, and that's what we don't want. For test booklets and unopened packages, pretty much the same thing, except you don't need the paper, the plastic bags. Get them into the box, fill it up to the top with the extra paper. Make sure you fold in flaps A and B. Put the tape on there. Put on the white label, which is for test booklets and unopened packages. Check the bottom of the box, make sure it's secured, and they can send it back to the ERC. We do use UPS as our return service. If you do not have a regularly scheduled UPS pickup, then you'll need to schedule a pickup. Give them the boxes. These are prepaid labels. They need to take them. They're paid for them to grab them. But if you don't have a regularly scheduled, we have the PA assessment box return system. It's through our vendor out in Pennsylvania. We have Advanced Shipping Technologies. And it's a good way to go in there and you can find all the tracking, all the UPS tracking numbers that have been assigned to your school, and go in there and click on them and say, I want this picked up tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So it's a way for you to schedule pickups. It's also a good system because we can access it, you can access it, and at some point we don't see boxes showing up, we can go in the system and find out the status of those boxes, as well as you can too. If you like the old-fashioned way, you can still call UPS and schedule a pickup. Just know that if you schedule through AST or through UPS, at least 24 hours notice is needed. They can't come out in the same day and pick up boxes. And also, if using the AST system, once you schedule the pickup, it takes about 24 hours for UPS to refresh the data in the systems. So it's not going to be happening automatically, but make sure you check back within 24 hours, and the information in the AST system should be available about what the status of the boxes. If you don't use AST, please keep a copy of the tracking numbers. If your school or district gets a call right after the testing window, we're calling because there's an issue with your materials. We don't call for any other reason during that window. Whoever answers the phone, just let them know that if somebody from DRC is calling, it's about an issue on materials, you need to get that call returned to us. I don't know how many times we have calls now returned, people just ignore it, and booklets are missing, and then students don't get scores, and of course, it affects your accountability reporting, because there's no scores to be reported for accountability. Online administration, for those of you that are tapping your feet, I have about 17 more minutes, and then we'll take questions. And for those of you remotely, remember to put your questions in the chat box. So for online administration, the biggest issue is not getting the student records prepared. Students are prepared to go and everything, but you haven't gone in there and done your job preparing student records, like adding accommodations. So for the general information about online testing, obviously we need internet connectivity. We need to have the students corresponding with our servers. We do have testing available on the desktops, iPads, Chromebooks, a lot of different devices in Pennsylvania. So basically, if you have a device, more than likely the student can test on it. We have a COS service device, and it is highly recommended. I'm going to say if you're going to test online, you should be using it. It's a way to get the content locally delivered to you and stored within your building. So when the students start testing, there's no delay in test content downloading to their device. So if you're going to test online, although we can't require it, I would not try to test online without it. Question we get all the time is about student responses. They are regularly saved to servers, and I'll show you later on how we do that. We've never lost an online student record or online student test. And if you ever go to the documents section, under the user guides and the documents, we do have things called tech bulletins. They're updated frequently for anything new that's happening with the online systems. So if you want to know what's going on and you're not sure, hit the documents section. Okay, real quick, what you should be doing for online testing is obviously check the infrastructure, check your bandwidth, check your devices. Just make sure you have the capacity to do online testing. Do this beforehand, because you wait till the day of testing, you're going to have errors and issues. Next, you need to install the software. Again, I recommend the COS service device for all online testing. And it's available in our download sections on our DRC Insight portal, as well as the Windows and Mac secure browsers. If you're going to be using a Chromebooks or an iPad or Windows in 10S mode, the secure mode, then you need to go to their app stores and download the apps out of their app stores. So preparing the students, we talked about earlier about the tutorials. This is where the students can sit down and watch videos of how the test engine works. And all of them together about 20 minutes. Really neat is an interactive website where they click on, show me how to use a ruler, show me how to use a highlighter. It's really quick videos that kids like to see. It's not like a real long one, so it's a lot of quick ones. And of course, we have the online tools training, which is actually a real practice test. There's one for each subject. It's about 15 minutes. What I would recommend is you have your tech person set stuff up and it tests your bandwidth and it tests your capacity and it tests the devices to have a bunch of kids get into a classroom and take the online tools training at the same time. It's going to ping your wireless routers. It's going to let you know whether you have the bandwidth to actually test in that classroom. And it's good for the students to actually learn how to use the tools. So managing student information before testing. It's very important that you go into student records and do this work early. Because again, once they start testing, we start locking stuff down. For PSSA, every student we get from PIMS is going to be available in the system to add to online testing sessions. If you have students who are not in the system, you can upload those into the system yourself. It's a very flexible, very fluid system. And again, make sure all online accommodations are added before creating the test sessions. You need to add teachers. It was earlier mentioned that test administrators' initials are required for all testing. The booklets, you bubble it in the back. If you're testing online, you just have to add a teacher to the system so you can add the teacher to the test sessions. And then for creating test sessions, you can create them by class, create one big one, create ones just for your small groups, just for your audios. It's all up to you. It's kind of makes it easier for you to manage the test tickets. And when printing test tickets, you can print the entire school, by class, by individual student. It's all up to you how you want to do it. One thing I want to say is that when you do print test tickets, remember they are secure, just like test materials. The most common online use we have, I talked about earlier, is audio versions for the online testing. When using the audio version, you have to use the Central Office Services secure device. We need the content downloaded because these audio files can be 4 or 5 meg per item. And to try to get them in DRC, it takes too much time, too much bandwidth for the students. So it's important that you have it locally in the COS service device. And just how you know if the student's doing the audio version is it's right on the test ticket. So if a student has the audio version, the accommodations listed, and they get an error that says internet connection error, first thing you want to do is make sure that it's service device and check with the tech person to make sure that thing is turned on. Most common thing we get is the kid gets this message about a connection error, and we find out the COS was turned off overnight, and somebody forgot to turn it back on. So that's the first thing you want to check to make sure. And when doing the online process as DAX or a SAX, you have some tools you can use to help monitor the testing that's going on. One of them is the student dashboard. This is a charts and graphs that tell you the percentage of students that are testing have not tested. You can click on the graphs and drill down to the actual student information. We have tables where it gives you a status of every single student and their testing, if they're completed, if they're started, if they're currently in testing, how long they've been testing, and it's all exportable. So a lot of tools you can use as a coordinator. Also as a coordinator, one of the tools is to unlock tickets. A lot of reasons why you want to unlock tickets, but the most common is the student goes home ill at the end of the day, and they're allowed to go back the next day and start out where they left. The paper booklet, it's easy, you just open it back up. For online, you have to unlock the tickets, because all tickets lock every night at 5 o'clock. They lock up. So You also have the ability to monitor your schools about how many logins have been going on. Every student should have at least one login. When they start getting 2 or 3 logins, that's when they start hitting these reports. And there's reasons for multiple logins. It could be a student, battery went dead on the laptop, so they had to go to another computer. Or they need extended testing time, which was in another room. So there's a lot of reasons why these could be happening. And again, test tickets are considered secured. Real quickly, I'm going to tell you how online testing happens, what the process is. First thing is you need to set up the infrastructure. We recommend you do this 3 to 4 weeks prior. So all the software, everything's housed in the DRC servers. And they will be requested through the internet to your network, whoever's running your network for you. And they will install the COS on a local server, which is basically just another computer. One or multiple, if you have a lot of students testing, you use multiple servers. And then they need to take and download the DRC Insight software, the actual testing engine, to all the student devices. This should be done 3 to 4 weeks prior. It does take a little setup sometimes. And then on the day of testing, what happens is throughout the weeks after they set up the infrastructure, the devices, the content is stored sort of locally in the Amazon cloud over in Virginia. What happens is we take the content, we go up to the COS service device, we ping it and say, do you have the most up-to-date content? If not, it's updated. We check this daily. Where there's testing going on now, we keep checking it to make sure the most current content is in there. And then on the day of testing, the student's going to click on the software, the desktop icon, and it's going to ping our DRC servers and we're going to say, is that the most current version? It should be, but if not, we'll update it. It takes a couple seconds to update the version. And then what happens is the student actually logs into the test. When they log into the test, it hits our servers in DRC, grabs the test session information, and goes back and says, yes, grade 3 PSSA section 1. Then it goes up to the COS service device and posts on all the content locally, and the student can start testing. Student answers the first question, sends a response to DRC. We say, hey, we got it. We send back a token. Student keeps testing. Student cannot continue testing unless they get the token from us saying you can continue to the next item. If for some reason there's an internet connection, we have introduced or started a new process. In the old days, it would just stop them from testing and they had to stop. And we discovered a lot of times this internet connection error was lasting less than a minute. There was a hiccup in the bandwidth. There was something wrong that was happening. So we've now instituted what we call the enhanced retries method. What happens is they'll get an error message that you just saw, and DRC will attempt for 5 minutes to reconnect. The Insight test engine will keep sending responses for 5 minutes. What happens 90% of the time is the connection is reestablished. The test administrator may come over because the student raised their hand, but there's nothing there because it reconnected and the student continues testing. The second thing that can happen is the test administrator comes over, sees the message, and the student just wait and wait for it to reestablish. If within 5 minutes it doesn't reestablish, they get another connection error that requires them to exit the Insight test engine. And at which time they exit the Insight test engine and start doing some locally, look at the device, what's going on. The third thing can happen, the test administrator comes over and just says, okay, exit the test, end the test now, we're not gonna wait. So it's all what they wanna do. Like I said, 90% of the time, nobody knows what happens because the hiccup's gone and the student keeps testing. That's all I have about online testing. I have 2 more slides about the accountability systems. Just to let you know how they work. We get a test record produced, whether it's an online or a paper pencil for every student that tested. And then we get a file from the University of Pittsburgh for Pasa students. Then PDE sends us a file from PIMS that says, here's all the students that are being held accountable by this school. And then we take the test data and we match them PA/ID, first name, last name, and date of birth and grade, and we make a match. And for a lot of you, if you've done all the bubbling correctly and used the pre-code labels correctly, everything's perfect. There's no problems at all. But if for some reason during the process, the bubbling was incorrect, we can't make a match, that's when you need to go into the attribution system and find the match for that student. mean, in the attribution system, you can also move students around as needed if PIMS has them wrong. But the most important thing is go in there and find that student record so you can get 100% participation, if for every student that tested. The system is June 19th to the 25th for the grades 3 through 8. And again, it's important to go in there. A lot of times we'll get calls later on about why is our participation rate so low? Sometimes because barcode labels weren't used correctly. Sometimes it's because books were tucked. Sometimes because they didn't go in there and match up their records in the system. We also have the grade 11 system, pretty much the same thing, except because it's using Keystone data, we're not looking at current test events, we're looking at historical test events. But same thing, we get a file, we try to match a record. If we can't, because 3 years ago in grade 8, the student had a different last name, we can't match it up, you'll go in there and find the record and make the match yourself. And this window is July 16th to the 20th. Told you it'd be 17 minutes. That's all I have. We're going to pause for about 3 minutes to check the chat box for questions. And if you have any, please send them in there. If you have any locally here, you can raise your hand and ask us.
How many are in a pack?
11.
11. So you have to figure out, it would require a little bit of work. Oh, sorry.
And yeah,
And
we're muted there for a second, so we're good now.
And the DAC can serve as a TA. That was another question. And there's another question here.
If parents request to review the PSSAs prior to the tests, and we're taking the tests online, what do we do if we don't have the?
So the question is, parental requests, and we're an online site, what do I do? Contact DRC as soon as possible,
Okay.
and request that we send you out a paper booklet.
Okay, so it said, this first one, is there supposed to be audio or is the session not begun yet? Is it still SPP? I thought it was future ready. Well, yeah, there's future ready, but SPP is still in the background. So SPP is the accountability system for Pennsylvania. Future ready is more of the public one. Slide 14 states that test administrators need to take SAC and TA training. Is this correct? Well, no, they only have to take TA training. I didn't see if that was a mistake. Slide 14. You could go to see it, but
Yeah, we'll check it out.
but if it is that way, yeah, it's incorrect. It's just TA training. Clarification, please. Substitutes are paid by third party but work for district are allowed to be TAs. Yes. Please advise as to where today's presentation can be located and downloaded. So that'll be in 2 weeks on the PDE website. Building clocks do not work. Can we use a clock function available on Promethean panel smartboard? Prior DRC told us no. I don't even know.
I've never heard that question
Never
before.
heard that.
I'm not sure what that is, but that's just a clock that's being displayed on the smartboard. I do not see why it would not be.
Yeah, if it's a clock, it's a clock. So that wouldn't be a problem. Can we move to an online collection of documentation rather than a physical binder? You're talking about the binder for DACs and SACs at the school level. Well, I never heard that before, but I would suggest, I mean, why not? I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking about, but I mean, why not?
Just has to be available for the monitor when you get there, right?
Yeah, it has to be available. So as long as you'd be able to show everything online for the monitor that's there, I don't see why you couldn't do that. But if you want more clarification, send me an email about that, and then I can look that up and try to think about it and discuss it with you.
crweller@pa.gov. Not me.
Thank you. And it says opting out of Keystone testing due to religious reasons. Does a parent need to review the test booklets and submit a letter for every testing window if they wish not to have their child test? Or is it a yearly review and letter acceptable? No, it's every testing window for their children. People think that it's a year-long thing, but it's not.
Yeah, it's every testing window because they're objecting to some content in the test, not the test itself. They're objecting to some content in the test, and every administration are new items, so new tests for them to have to, new content for them to have to review.
So is that it?
That looks like that's it.
I think that's it.
Okay, well, everybody that's online there, we thank you very much. You guys have a good day.
Thank you.
And those in the room here, if you have any more questions, we are here for you.